Hi everyone, so I know I haven't uploaded in some weeks now, but I was a little bit busy and I also haven't been reading much, so a lot of the stuff that I was planning on uploading wasn't really about reading or anything like that, so I was unsure about whether or not to upload it or film it because I don't know, I feel like I have to keep a more balanced amount of book stuff or of music stuff or fashion stuff and all that. So yeah, I was unsure on whether or not to upload at all. And something that I noticed a while ago is that I started to question whether or not my reviews and my ratings were a little too harsh and a little too negative, I guess, or tending towards the negative side. And I've been thinking about why it seems that I rarely give positive reviews and ratings to books, and specifically the way that I have been reading and reviewing books since I started this channel, and how my system for reviewing makes it kind of easier for me to be harsh on books. Now, I don't think that being too critical or too harsh are necessarily bad things when it comes to book reviewing. I've gotten a couple of kind of passive-aggressive comments about my reviewing when it comes to certain books, specifically classics or older books that are very respected or, tend to be, especially or are from genres that tend to be more respected, if you will. But I don't think I'm doing anything wrong by giving negative reviews or mixed reviews or books reviews that are too harsh or whatever. It's just that I feel like at least when I feel like I have good reasons behind it, then I obviously don't have a problem with it myself. But I have noticed that in this year, 2021, I have not given a single 4-star or 5-star rating. So it made me think a bit more on why, or rather how I review things, and maybe that is making it easier for me to give harsher ratings and reviews on things. I actually made an average for the rating that I tend to give to books, or at least that I have given to books in this channel, and it was 3 stars or 2.9 or something like that on average. So I feel like I'm pretty, to me, 3 stars is a positive rating, so I think that that's pretty okay when it comes to, like not being too negative, not being too overly positive. So I think one of the main reasons why it's kind of difficult to sometimes give a positive review on things especially when a book has really a large amount of flaws, not necessarily a large amount of flaws, but a huge flaws, even if they're very few. I think one of the reasons why that seems to be a problem is because the different aspects of storytelling are very intertwined with each other and they affect each other. So for example, if the writing style is too simple, tell as opposed to show, then that's going to also affect the depth of the story, which is of course also one of my 5 points when I review. Those two are some of the 5 points I review. And that's also something that's probably going to affect the characters, the lack of character development, or the characters are going to seem flatter if the style itself is really flat and bland. So if I have 5 points and 3 of those points are affected by one issue, then 3 points are essentially going to become affected to some degree just by one problem in the story. Now, of course, I try to keep them separate. I try to not make them overlap too much when I review. But I think that there's still some degree in which things are just going to affect each other, and that's also, that's a problem with writing as well. That if you have one big problem with your style, or you have one big problem with your characters, then that's going to end up affecting pretty much all of the other aspects of storytelling. But for example, if I think the dialogue is really bad, then I try to keep that in writing style as opposed to characters, and not count it towards the characters and whether or not they're good. However, there's many different ways again in which these issues affect each other, which is something that makes reviewing really difficult, because it often makes for a rating that, even if it feels honest and real, it could also be feeling to yourself as a reviewer, or maybe to other people, it could be feeling either too harsh or too generous. The second thing is the fact that a review or a rating tell very little about the importance or the influence of a book, whether in literature or in culture in general. I was talking about this, or I think I briefly mentioned it when I was talking about the trial. But the problem is that it's obviously very difficult to add that sort of thing to our reading. You know, the trial I think of as a book that feels into some degree important to me, or you know, it seems to be very influential at least. But it's kind of difficult to make use of that if you're going to review a book, because a review is mainly about whether or not you think it was good and why. It's very difficult to add that sort of thing to our rating system because, for one, the way that I do it is obviously by 5 points, like I've been mentioning, like I've been saying, and I have 5 points, 1 point per star, and I would have to add a sixth one, and of course that's just not very convenient, because of course usually the system for ratings is 5 stars, right? And also I think that would be unfair towards books that are more recent or that just haven't had the opportunity to be influential or important yet. And I've already spoken about my issues with the importance of the book or using its importance for a positive rating. I think it's also unfair because some books are going to be much more blatant about what subjects they're about, and therefore why those topics are important. And some are going to be more subtle, and they may come off as more shallow or as not being ones that deal with anything that important because maybe they're too symbolic or what have you. And also, people are inherently going to have different ideas on what is important, more important than something else, and what is less important. So, you know, it just adds to things that could be too unfair for a review. As a whole, I think we should keep the discussion on whether a book is influential or important as something separate to whether or not it's good. A third problem is that, in my opinion, books should be rated differently depending on what it seems that they're trying to achieve or what their point is. In other words, on what their genre is, which of course a lot of people have already said some things like this, but you know, genres are mainly just a matter of marketing. So it's a bit difficult to even tell when one genre ends and the other starts. A lot of the time, some books are just a mixture of things, and some of them don't really have any genre, which is generally kinds of books that are referred to as literary fiction, or just fiction or general fiction. At first, when I looked at my Goodreads account some years ago, and I saw that I gave some literary fiction or maybe a classic book a low rating or maybe 3 stars, and that I gave a romance book also 3 stars or maybe even a higher rating, a part of my mind went, no, there's no way, like why would I give these such different ratings even if it's generally considered that this genre is better or more worthy than the other, as if books belonging to a certain genre should be awarded or should be negated some points because of what they are, of what they're trying to do. I mean, the thing is that some romance novels are good at being romance novels, and similarly some science fiction novels or some general, you know, literary fiction novels are not good, or they're just kind of mediocre at being what they are. And that's why they will often have a low rating, whereas maybe a romance novel will have a high rating, because they're obviously trying to do different things. And I think that sometimes people kind of lose sight of that. I got a comment recently in a science fiction review, a science fiction book review, which I gave sort of a mixed review, and this guy, I guess, or I don't know if they were a woman or whatever, but they said that I should, obviously they were being passive aggressive. They said that it was such a shame that I didn't understand it and that I should read romance instead. And I was like, this is exactly the kind of thing that I was talking about when in my previous video about reviewing, about how not to review and how not to respond to reviews. That's exactly the kind of thing that I was referring to. Those comments that make people act as if some genres are somehow less worthy of being read or of being given good ratings or positive ratings. There's this weird idea behind these types of comments that say that somehow science fiction should be awarded some sort of extra points that romance shouldn't be awarded. And initially I myself felt that it was kind of weird that I gave certain genres that are often given less respect higher ratings or the same ratings as more respected genres. And initially I was kind of confused as to how I should handle those ratings or those different points when talking about different genres that are trying to do different things, like science fiction or fantasy. Maybe when I talk about those, should I talk about world building instead of depth, or should I merge them into one? I still don't have that much of an answer for that either. Since I still change it kind of depending on what I think the book is trying to go for. Like if I think a book is sort of a mixture between science fiction and literary fiction, then obviously depth is much more holds much more weight. But I still think that having some degree of depth is still important. I should at least try to have something to say, you know, even if their main goal isn't really the message or trying to say something, because, well, why would you read a book if you are not going to get any sort of new or interesting experience from it? And when I say depth, I'm not necessarily talking about a philosophical dissertation or anything like that. Sometimes I'm just referring to something as simple as giving a bit of an insight as to how life in a certain country is, or in a certain time, or something of the sort, you know, something that the audience, the reader, may not be that familiar with, and they might find it interesting, or, you know, some sort of insight inside a person's mind whose experience is different from ours, or something of the sort. My fourth point, and maybe the one that really started this idea, the idea behind this video, is the fact that I'm starting to, or at least I was starting to enjoy reading less because I was so focused on the reviewing and the reading aspect of it. I've noticed lately that when I start reading a book, I pretty much immediately start to make an effort to notice things about the writing style, about the characters, about how things are paced. And of course, to some degree, that's just a matter of reading. When you have read before, you have some experience reading, then you start to notice patterns, and you start to notice what things you like in terms of style or in terms of pacing, and what things you don't like. But I think it's also in part the fact that I'm already trying to know what I'm going to say when I review it, what points I'm going to bring up, and I try to notice things so that I can review the book. And I don't know, I feel like that might have been affecting my enjoyment of reading overall, because maybe there's books that I could have enjoyed a bit more if I hadn't been too focused on reviewing them. But at the same time, I think that, you know, looking at books in a different way, in a more critical way, is sometimes just a matter of time, because you keep reading more, and the more you read, the more you realize that you like some things more than others, you know. Obviously, when you start reading, or at least when you start reading, you know, full-on novels for the first time, you're much more easily impressed than when you have been reading for longer. And of course, you're, you know, not as easily impressed, and therefore more critical. And kind of recently I watched this video by Anthony Fantano. He was talking about, he got a comment or a tweet or something like that from a person who was saying that maybe they didn't enjoy music, listening to music as much as they did before, because maybe they were doing too often, or because they had been reviewing it too long or something like that. And he said, you know, maybe you should just stop for a little while. You should just stop for a little while and then see what happens. Maybe you just need to take a break from it, and once you take a break, you'll notice that it is actually something that you do like and that you do have passion for. So I'm not saying that I'm going to necessarily take a break from reading or reviewing. I mean, I still think that it's kind of the main theme and the main point of this channel, although I don't know, I also felt like the reason why I gave this channel a name, a personal name, as opposed to something reading or something reviewing, is because I knew that I wanted it to be about my interests and my hobbies, as opposed to about reading and reviewing specifically. So just so you know, I will continue to make videos about books and maybe videos about reviewing and about reading itself, and I'm still going to review books on this channel, but I'm planning to make more music related videos in the near future, and also more personal videos, which, you know, I don't really mind if I get less views on those, because, you know, again, I'm just interested in making videos about stuff that I'm interested in, and that I think that I might have something to say about it, or that, you know, just kind of might be passionate about. Again, I'm not going to stop reading and reviewing, but it might not be the main topic in this channel for a couple of months, or maybe just 1 month or something. I'm not sure, but just so you know, there's going to be a bit of a slight change in the channel. Nothing too drastic really, but Yeah, so tell me what you think about this whole issue with reading and reviewing and being too harsh or maybe being too generous. And also thank you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.